Matt Woolen from Shutterrunner.com, and welcome to part 2 of my HDR tutorial, Processing the Photo. If you haven't seen part 1 of the tutorial, Capturing the Photo, I definitely recommend starting there. Otherwise, you've come to the right place. I'm going to walk you through all the different programs that I use to create an HDR image from the 9 bracketed photos that I took in part 1 of the tutorial. So the first program I use is Adobe Lightroom. And as you can see, here are the different brackets, the raw files that I captured in part 1. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a bracket somewhere in the middle. And all that I use Lightroom for is just to correct the white balance across the images that I captured and then export those images to TIFF file so that I can process them in Photomatix. So to correct the white balance, there's a couple different tools that you can use in Lightroom. My favorite is this eyedropper tool, which lets you click on a neutral, like a white or a gray, and it will correct the white balance just from that data. So I'm going to go ahead and click on a piece of the cloud right here. And as you can see, it made the white balance a little bit warmer, and actually that looks pretty nice. Another thing you can do is you can use one of these drop downs to select a preset or even this auto option. And as you can see, that looks just a little bit too warm. So I'm going to go back to the eyedropper tool and just click on that cloud again. And that looks a lot better. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on the image that I changed the white balance of, and I'm going to go to Develop Settings and then Copy Settings. Now I can copy all the different develop settings. In this case, all that I changed was the white balance. So I click Copy. Now I'm going to select all the images. I'm going to right click on all of them. I'm going to go to Develop Settings and then Paste Settings. So now you can see that each of these different images have inherited the white balance setting of the middle one that I changed. You can see right here it's 5950 for temp and -5 for tint across all images. Okay, so now that I've done that, I'm just going to select all of these files and I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to Export, Export. I'm going to choose my destination folder. I'm going to choose the TIFF option. I'm going to choose 16-bit and the color space sRGB. Now one thing that I didn't mention in Lightroom is that when I initially load all the pictures into Lightroom, I changed the default develop settings. And as you can see here, the contrast is set to 0, the brightness is set to 0, the blacks are set to 0, and this tone curve is set to linear. This is important, and I'm not sure exactly why, but Photomatix will tell you to do this. And for whatever reason, Photomatix handles the TIFF files better when they have been processed with these default settings set that way. Okay, so I'm going to click Export, and I'm done in Lightroom. Okay, after you're done with Lightroom, the next program that I use is Photomatix. And I've already opened Photomatix up right here, so I'm just going to go to Load Bracketed Photos. I'm going to browse to my TIFF files, and I'm going to select them all and click Load. Then I'll click OK. It brings up this menu here, and as you can see by default, all these checkboxes are unchecked. The first checkbox option, Align Source Images, I would have used this had I not been shooting with the tripod, but since I did shoot a tripod, and you should always shoot with a tripod, I'm going to leave this unchecked. The second option here is to reduce ghosting artifacts. Had I taken the picture in a park with people present, or if there was a car, for example, moving through the brackets that appeared different across each image, I would check this, and this would allow me to eliminate that ghosting artifact. But since I was looking straight up at a building with no people or no movement, I don't need to check that option. And then these second two checkboxes I never check. So I'm going to click Pre-Process. So once that's done processing, you'll see the preview screen of your HDR image. This actually looks pretty good. The first thing I always do when I'm playing around in Photomatix is I'll reset all these sliders to the default setting. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I used to spend a lot of time in Photomatix trying to play around with every slider. As I've learned more and more about the HDR process, I've actually started to use Photomatix less and kind of just stick with the default settings that it gives me. But one of the sliders that I definitely do play with is this strength setting. And to start out, I'll move it pretty high to 100. For me, this is a little bit too dark, so I'm going to bring that back. But usually I'll keep it pretty high. So in this case, I'm going to drop it down to about 72. The other two sliders that I use are luminosity and microcontrast, and they tend to have the opposite effect. Luminosity making the picture brighter, and microcontrast making it darker. So I'm going to go ahead and move this up. And then I'm going to counteract that effect with the microcontrast. And that looks pretty good right there. I like the overall look of this image. One thing to notice though is this highlights clipping right up here. And you can see right here and maybe a little bit right here where it's just a little bit too bright. And there's some clipping, some just pure white areas of the section. So we'll fix that in Photoshop. When I'm done in Photomatix, I'll go ahead and click Process. Okay, so now I'm going to assume that you went ahead and saved that Photomatix HDR as a TIFF file, and you've opened that TIFF file in Photoshop, which I've done here. So as you can see, I've got the histogram open. You can see that clipping. That's the first thing that I notice when I open this, here and here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to File Open, and I'm going to open one of the TIFF files that's exposed correctly for the sky without that clipping. So one of the darker sky images. So I'm going to open this one right here. So this looks better. There's no highlights clipping. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to select all, copy, and I'm just going to paste it on top of the HDR there. So I'm going to assume that you know how to do masking in Photoshop. If not, it's a very important part of this tutorial and my processing, so I definitely recommend checking out a tutorial on that. But assuming you know masking, I'm going to go on this layer here, which is the one of the underexposed images, and I'm going to go Layer, Layer Mask, Hide All. So I'm going to take my paintbrush now. I'm going to take a white paintbrush. I'm going to turn the opacity down to about 20%. See how that works. And I'm going to try to fill back in this clipping, and that's starting to look nice. You can actually see the histogram starting to get fixed right away. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here. Okay, so that looks a lot better. Here's the before and then the after. So now that that's done, I'm going to do a little trick I know. On Mac, it's Open Apple, Option, Shift, and E. Basically, that just takes everything that's visible and it merges it into a new layer on top of the image. Okay, so the next part of my processing is a filter called Nik Software Color Effects Pro 3.0, and I'm going to open that. It's just Nik Color Effects is just a series of Photoshop filters, and it's a huge part of my processing technique. Actually, I love all of these filters, just about. So the first one that I'll use is the tonal contrast filter. Tonal contrast gives it kind of enhances the HDR look, as you can see. So there's the before and there's the after. I don't know how much I'll use it in here, but it definitely enhances the texture of the buildings, which I really like. So I'm just gonna play with these sliders a little bit. I usually just bring down the effect a little bit, especially the mid-tone and shadow. These two sliders make the most difference. So once I've done that, I'll hit OK. And I'll let this process. And once that's done, you can see the before and then the after effect of this filter. Again, I'm going to go Layer, Layer Mask. I'm going to go Hide All. And I'm going to take a white brush. I'm going to make it a little bit stronger. We'll go 50% this time. And I'm just going to paint over the buildings with a bigger paintbrush here. And I'm just going to bring out the texture in the buildings so that they really pop. move this over. Another thing about this this tonal contrast filter, it's great for reflections. So if ever there are windows in my photos, I'll be sure to use this. Okay, another trick when you're layer masking, if you hold the Alt key, again that's in Mac, and then you click on the layer mask, it will show you this, so you can see kind of the spots that you missed and then just paint over them. So that's what I'm going to do here. Okay, so I'm going to click Alt again and then click on that. And then let's have a before and then after. And you can kind of see how the buildings look a lot sharper. Alright, so again I'm going to use that Open Apple Alt Shift E. And I'm going to use another color effects filter now. The next filter I use is called Pro Contrast, and this is my favorite color effects filter. You can see the before and the after. It just adds a ton of contrast without overdoing it. There's actually two pieces to it. There's a color correction and then the contrast correction. Both are really handy, so let's take a look at them independently. So here's with the color correction turned off. And then as I move it, there's pretty much no change actually. But a lot of times I'll notice a really big change in the color and it will just make the picture look so much better. But that's definitely not the case here, as I got the white balance pretty accurate. So I'm just going to kind of leave that down towards 0%. And then for contrast, I just don't want to overdo it. So I'm going to kind of see how it looks. So you can see there the clouds are starting to really clip up at 80, up in the 80s. I'm going to bring it down to, since I like the way that the buildings look over here, up at 60%, I'm going to leave it at 60, and then I'm just going to take a layer mask and I'm going to fix the clouds in some of this other clipped area. So there's a ton of highlights clipping now that I did that. So I'm going to go layer, layer mask, reveal all. I'm going to take a black brush. Say 20%. And I'm just going to fix these clipped areas. And that doesn't seem to be strong enough, so I'm going to bump that up to about 35%. And I'm trying to go a little bit quicker here for the sake of the tutorial. So let's go ahead and fix this. What you don't want is the sky to look too fake and over processed. But I think that looks pretty good right there. And you can see the clipping is gone now. Okay, so thanks for following along with the tutorial. For more information and tips, check out shutterrunner.com.